tradition of visiting this small, family-owned pumpkin patch just outside of town. The place wasn't anything fancy, just a few acres of land with rows of pumpkins, a small barn, and a couple of old tractors on display. The pumpkins were always the best. Big, round, perfectly orange. Every year we'd pick out the best ones to carve and paint for Halloween, and I always get a little too competitive about finding the most perfect pumpkin. That year, I found one that was practically calling my name. It was huge, almost cartoonishly fat, with a perfectly smooth surface. The kind of pumpkin that makes you want to show it off to everyone. My parents were still picking out theirs, but I grabbed it and rolled it over to the cart. I was already imagining how it would look with a huge, creepy face carved into it, glowing on our porch. Once we had all our pumpkins, we paid, loaded them into the car, and headed home. And everything felt so routine at that point. Just another fall day, another pumpkin patch visit. But that changed the moment we got home. We laid down some old newspaper on the kitchen table, and my mom got the knives out and the little pumpkin carving kits. The smell of pumpkins filled the air as my dad got started on his. My mom began gutting hers, and I stared down at mine, eager to get going. I grabbed the knife and started to carve into the top like always, right around the stem so I could pull the cap off. Except, something weird happened. The knife did not cut like it should. It was like the top had already been cut before, and then sealed up. Confused, I tugged on the stem, and to my surprise, the top of the pumpkin just popped off, like it had been glued shut. A wave of putrid air hit me immediately, and I gagged, almost dropping the lid. My mom noticed my reaction and asked what was wrong. I looked down into the pumpkin, expecting to see some rotten seeds or maybe mold. But what I saw wasn't that simple. Inside the pumpkin, there was something that did not belong. A hand. At first I thought it was a joke. Someone had stuck a fake severed hand inside for a laugh. Halloween prank, right? It looked fake, pale and waxy, like something you buy at a dollar store. I nudged it with the knife, expecting it to feel hollow or plasticky. It didn't. My mom came over to see what was going on, and the second she looked inside, she screamed, like real, true fear. My dad ran over, grabbed the pumpkin, and looked inside, his face going white as a sheet. "Get away from it," he said. "Go outside now." I did not argue. I went straight out the back door and sat on the porch, my mind spinning. What was happening? Why was my mom crying? What had I just seen? My dad called the police, and within a half an hour, the house was swarming with them. Detectives, cops, even a forensics team. They taped out the kitchen and started taking pictures, dusting things for fingerprints. I remember watching them from the window, their expressions grim as they handled the pumpkin like it was some kind of crime scene. It turned out the hand inside wasn't fake. It was real, human, decayed, severed at the wrist. How long it had been there, no one knew. The police asked us a million questions. Where did we get the pumpkin? Had we noticed anything strange at the farm? Who else had handled it? They went back to the pumpkin patch and interviewed everyone working there. The worst part, no one could figure out how it got there. They couldn't identify who the hand belonged to. No missing person matched it. No fingerprints came up in the system. It was like the hand had just appeared out of nowhere, and no one knew why. The police suggested it might have been gang-related, some sort of sick message or initiation ritual, but nothing ever came of it. No arrests, no leads. That pumpkin patch trip ruined Halloween for me for a long time. I couldn't even look at pumpkins after that without feeling sick to my stomach. We never went back to that farm again. My parents tried to play it off like some kind of bizarre, isolated incident, but I know it affected them too. My mom couldn't stop thinking about how close that hand had been at her house to me. What if there had been something else? What if the whole pumpkin had been filled with more than just a hand? I still think about it sometimes, especially around Halloween. And I'll be at the store, looking at the rows of pumpkins, and I get this weird feeling in the pit of my stomach, like any one of them could be hiding something horrific inside, something that shouldn't be there. Sometimes when I smell that faint, earthy scent of pumpkins in the air, I can still catch a whiff of that rotten smell, the one that hit me the second I opened up that pumpkin. I haven't carved one since. I can't. I just paint them now. I grew up on a farm just outside of a small town, where my family had been running a pumpkin patch every fall for as long as I could remember. And every September through October, we opened the gates, inviting families to pick out pumpkins, go on hay rides, and enjoy the crisp fall air. It was our busiest time of the year, and despite the hard work, it was always fun. The whole town loved it. People made it a tradition to visit. But last year, something happened that I still can't shake. It was a week before Halloween, and we had just finished another long, busy day. My parents, my two younger brothers, and I had cleaned up the grounds, locked everything down, and turned on the security cameras that we had recently installed to deter anyone from sneaking in at night. We were extra cautious because we had experienced some theft the previous year. Just some teens messing around, but still, the cameras gave my dad peace of mind. That night, I woke up around midnight. My room is on the second floor, and my window faces the pumpkin patch. I'm a light sleeper, and the sound of rustling outside had woken me up. Groggy but curious, I got up and peered through the blinds. That's when I saw him. There was a man wandering around the pumpkin patch, slow and aimless, like he was just out for a casual stroll. He was older, probably in his late 60s or early 70s, wearing a worn-out jacket that looked like it hadn't been washed in years. His movements were sluggish, like he was drunk or dazed. But what really freaked me out was what he did next. He bent down, picked up one of the pumpkins, and just started eating it. Not cutting it open or anything, just biting into it. The pumpkin was raw, and he was devouring it like an apple. His face was a mess of orange pulp and seeds, and I swear I could hear him chomping from my window. I panicked. I ran to my parents' room and shook my dad awake. "Dad, there's someone outside," I whispered. He thought I was imagining things, but when he looked at my window, his expression changed. He did not say anything, just stood there for a second, staring. Then, without a word, he grabbed a shotgun from the closet. My mom woke up by then too. She was trying to get him to calm down, but he was focused. I followed him downstairs, my heart pounding, unsure of what would happen next. When my dad stepped out onto the porch, he flipped on the floodlights. The man was still there, crouched by a pile of pumpkins, his hands covered in the stringy insides of one he had just torn apart with his teeth. My dad yelled, his voice booming through the night. "Hey, get the hell out of here." The man did not flinch. He looked up slowly, meeting our gaze. He had the most unsettling smile on his face, the kind that made my skin crawl. His teeth were stained orange from the pumpkin guts, and juice dripped down his chin. He did not seem scared at all. If anything, he looked amused. "Dad," I whispered, but I did not know what to say. My dad raised the shotgun, aiming it into the air, and fired a warning shot. The sound echoed across the fields, so loud it made my ears ring. The man did not even blink. He just stood there, grinning like some kind of maniac. For a second, I thought my dad was going to shoot him, but before it got to that point, the man suddenly stood up, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and casually walked away, disappearing into the dark fields behind our property. None of us slept that night. We stayed up, checking the cameras, but he never came back. The next morning, when the sun finally rose, my dad and I went to check the pumpkin patch. Most of the pumpkins were fine, except for the one the man had eaten. It was smashed to pieces, pulp and seeds everywhere, like a wild animal had gotten to it. But that wasn't the worst part. Sticking out of one of the untouched pumpkins was a massive, rusted knife. It was stabbed deep into the flesh of the pumpkin, the handle old and worn, like it had been used 100 times before. My dad pulled it out, but there was no note, no message, nothing to explain why it was there. We never saw that man again. We asked around town, showed people the security footage, but no one knew who it was. It did not fit the description of anyone in the area, and the footage was grainy, too blurry to make out any real details. The police did not take it seriously. Just some drifter passing through, they told my dad. But I know what we saw. That man wasn't just some random guy. The way he smiled, the way he didn't care about the gun, it was like he wasn't afraid of anything. Like he'd been there before and will be back again. Every time I pass by the pumpkin patch now, I can't help but wonder if he's still out there, watching, waiting. My family used to make this long trip every October to visit my grandparents in Louisiana. It was a 10-hour car ride from where we lived in Texas, and as a kid, those hours dragged on forever. I always dreaded it. We'd leave early in the morning and arrive late afternoon, exhausted and irritable. But this one trip, it sticks with me. We were about 45 minutes from my grandparents' house when I saw the first sign. It was one of those cheap wooden billboards by the side of the highway, painted in big orange letters. The freshest pumpkins you'll ever see. I was probably 9 or 10 at the time, and I remember immediately begging my parents to stop. The boredom of the drive made anything seem appealing, and I was just excited to get out of the car. At first they both said no, but then my mom looked at my dad and suggested that maybe we could bring a pumpkin for the family. It'd be a nice gesture, something festive to bring to my grandparents' house. My dad gave in and we took the exit. The road leading to the pumpkin patch was narrow and overgrown. It felt like it hadn't been used in years. The closer we got, the more off things started to feel. The air was thick, the kind of silence you don't notice until it's uncomfortable. When we pulled into the gravel lot, I noticed right away that it was completely empty. No other cars, no people, nothing. Just us. The farm looked run down, like it had seen better days. The pumpkins were scattered haphazardly, not in the neat rows you'd expect. In the middle of it all was this old, weathered shack. There were no signs of life. No lights, no movement, nothing. My parents seemed hesitant, but my mom said maybe someone was just inside the shack. So we all got out and started walking around, calling out to see if anyone was there. We walked up to the shack, but it was empty. The door was hanging off the hinges, and the inside was a mess, like it had been abandoned for years. I was starting to feel uneasy. I could tell my parents were too, though they tried not to show it. That's when my mom says she saw something. At first I thought she was kidding, trying to freak me out, but her voice sounded different, sharper, scared. She pointed to the corn stalks on the edge of the field. There was someone standing there, half hidden in the tall, dry stalks. I could just make out his figure. A man with long, greasy hair hanging over his face. He was watching us, not moving, just standing there. We all called out, asking if he worked there, if we could buy a pumpkin. No response. He just kept staring. My dad, who was always calm and in control, looked nervous. He grabbed my hand and said, "Let's go." My mom did not argue. We hurried back to the car, and I remember looking out the back window as we drove away. That man still standing in the same spot, watching us leave. The rest of the drive, my parents kept whispering to each other, trying to figure out what the hell that was. I did not say anything. I was too scared. The image of that man burned into my brain. I just wanted to get to my grandparents' house. When we finally arrived, we told my grandparents what had happened. I expected them to laugh it off, to tell us we were being paranoid. Instead, my grandfather's face went pale. He exchanged a look with my grandma before telling us something that chilled me to my core. The pumpkin farm we'd stopped at had been out of business for 2 months. The family who owned it had been murdered in the middle of the night. Shotguns, execution style, while they were sleeping. An entire family gone. No one knew who did it. The police were investigating, but there were no leads. And worse, the killer had not been caught. I remember feeling my stomach drop. We had just been there, and that man, who was he? Why was he watching us? My grandpa said no one had been out there since the murders. The farm was supposed to be abandoned. For the rest of that trip, I could not shake the feeling of being stalked. Even back at my grandparents' house, I kept glancing out the window, half expecting to see that man standing at the edge of their yard. But he never appeared. We did not talk about the farm much after that. The drive home felt like it took twice as long, and I stayed glued to my seat, scared to even look out the window. I'm older now, but every October I think about that trip. I still wonder who that man was and why he was there. Was it the killer? Was he waiting for another family to stop by? I'll never know. But I do know that we never stopped at any roadside attractions after that. Not once.
Hey, what's up guys? It's Spooky. If you've made it this far, congratulations, you survived. If you did not know, I have an Instagram. Follow me on there so we can connect. I also have a Patreon. On there, you'll have direct access to me and can see the upcoming videos, polls, and soon-to-be exclusive stories only shared on there. If that's something that interests you, please consider joining. That's all I have for you guys tonight. Stay spooky, and I'll see you in the next video.